Want a list of over 60 JDIs that made it into this release? Check out my post over at iceflowstudios.com. Starting off with our brushes, the maximum brush size has been increased to 5,000 pixels. This is up from 2,500 pixels in Photoshop CS5. Now, most users will never have a need for a 5,000 pixel brush, but for artists and photographers who deal with print-sized documents at a very high resolution, a brush of that size can certainly come in handy. In previous versions of Photoshop, changing the opacity of your active layer was quite simple. You can either adjust it in your Layers panel or by simply using the number keys on your keyboard. For example, pressing the number 6 would change the opacity to 60%. Holding down your Shift key and pressing 6 would change the fill opacity to 60%. 1 would be 10%, 8 would be 80%, and 0 would be 100%. You get the idea. However, if you wanted to decrease the opacity to 0%, there was no shortcut. You had to do it manually. In Photoshop CS6, Adobe has finally given us a shortcut. Press the 0 key twice on your keyboard to decrease the opacity to 0%. Hold down your Shift key and press it twice to decrease the fill opacity to 0%. Heading into the Layers panel, working with multiple layers has gotten a few nice tweaks. In Photoshop CS5, if you had multiple layers selected at once, your functionality was pretty limited. For one, you were not able to change the blend mode of more than one layer at once. Now in Photoshop CS6, even if you have multiple layers selected, you have the ability to change the blend mode of all selected layers. The same works for locking multiple layers as well. As long as you have more than one layer selected, pressing the lock button near the top of your Layers panel will lock all selected layers. As a user who likes to keep things organized in groups, I frequently got frustrated when I would attempt to duplicate the active group with the Command or Control J shortcut, only to find that nothing happened. Finally, in Photoshop CS6, you're able to duplicate layer groups using the same shortcut that duplicates your standard layers, Command or Control J. Another nice organization feature that's been added is the ability to color code your layers. By right-clicking any one of your layers in your Layers panel, you can give it one of 7 colors. This is very useful if you want to mark layers that need changing or simply want another way of identifying similar elements in your project. Another thing that frustrated me in Photoshop CS5 was that when you had layers that were hidden, you had to unhide them in order to see what the opacity and blend mode of that layer was. In Photoshop CS6, even if a layer is hidden, you can still see the correct blend mode and opacity. This next JDI may take some time to get used to, but it makes sense. In your Layer Styles dialog box, the order of the styles have been rearranged to better match the stacking order. In Photoshop CS5, it didn't make much sense that Drop Shadow was at the top of the list when it's the last style in the stack. Now, simply looking at the list, you know exactly what order the layer styles are added in. Now, heading into our Liquify filter, there are 2 JDIs that I'm thrilled about. The first one is the ability to adjust your brush size using the same shortcut you would with your standard brushes. The left square bracket key decreases your brush, while the right square bracket key increases it. And of course, the maximum brush size has been increased to 15,000 pixels. Again, most users will never have a need for a 15,000 pixel brush, but for those working with massive documents, it's now available to you. And those are